Another highly missed question on the genetics homework was about cystic fibrosis. The first question, it was a multi-part question. The first part of it says that cystic fibrosis is an autosomal recessive disorder in which mucus builds up in the lungs and pancreas. So an autosomal recessive disorder. Autosomal just means it's not of the X or Y gene. So really it just means it's not on those genes, it's anywhere else. And it's recessive. Let's use B for this. So lowercase b, it's recessive. So to have cystic fibrosis, you have to have two B's, two little B's right there. Because it's recessive, that's the only way you have it is if there's no dominant allele covering that up. Most people got the question right that asked what would happen, what the genotype would be for someone who has cystic fibrosis. So good job. The next question is, a healthier non-carrier man has a baby with a woman with cystic fibrosis. So, all right, we know if a woman has cystic fibrosis, that's her genotype right there. If he is a healthy non-carrier man, that means he is homozygous dominant, because if he was this with the little b, that's a carrier. He carries the gene but does not show it. It says he's not a carrier, so we know he is not that. So these are our parents. A homozygous dominant with a homozygous recessive, and it wants to know what is the chance that their child's going to have cystic fibrosis. So let's do a Punnett square for this. B. All right. Let me pull the B over. This B. This B. You'll notice these are all identical children genetically for this trait. Will any of these children have cystic fibrosis? No. All of them will be carriers for it. Every single one of these children is heterozygous for this trait. They all have the gene as a carrier, but none of them are non-carriers, none, 0%, and none of them have cystic fibrosis. Instead, our heterozygous possibility is 100%. So there's a 100% chance that they will all be carriers, but there's a 0% chance that they will have cystic fibrosis. This was the most missed question on the genetics homework. The question reads, squash can be yellow or green. When two yellow squash are crossed, the offspring are always yellow. When two green squash are crossed, sometimes the offspring are green and sometimes they are yellow, which must be true about the squash color gene. Over half the class said that the yellow gene was dominant. And then everyone else kind of varied with their answer. But the correct answer is that green is dominant, and let's talk about why that is. A lot of people will be tempted to say that yellow is dominant because it's showing up so frequently, and it's true. Let's use the letter A. That in this case, for this individual, yeah, the dominant color will show through, and because the capital letter is the dominant color. So a lot of people are tempted to think, oh, yellow must be dominant because there's a lot of yellow stuff going on. Except let's look a little more closely at this here. The trick key here is the two green parents, the sometimes, some green, some yellow. You got to watch out for words like sometimes and always in genetics, because those are pretty key. So green parents, their children can be green or yellow. Because there are two possible phenotypes for these children, we know that a green parent, at least one option, must be heterozygous. It doesn't mean that all green parents are heterozygous, but since there's two possible offspring, let's do a quick Punnett square and I'll show you. Let's say AA, over here. Bring this A down, this A over, this A. We know that these individuals, these offspring, will have different phenotypes. At least one of them will have the recessive phenotype and others will have a dominant phenotype. So in order for there to be two different kinds of offspring, at least one of the parents has to be this, has to be heterozygous. So that's the big deal thing. With two yellow parents and always yellow offspring, we know that this has to either be big A, or little a up here for yellow, because if it's always the same. All right, so let's go back to our green parents. If they are heterozygous, at least some of the time for this to be true, and we know that one green parent could be this, then that tells us actually right there, the green is the dominant gene. Because if this looks green, it's a green parent. And it has this dominant trait right there. That allele, that capital A, is dominant. So green is dominant. So in your case here, we could have an AA parent crossed with an AA parent. You could have an AA. This, you could have a homozygous dominant crossed with heterozygous. You could also have a totally homozygous dominant parent situation where they're both homozygous dominant. This scenario would give you only green offspring, it's true. But here the question is talking about all green parents. So with these options, this one is the one that will give you sometimes some yellow. Let's test our work. Let's see what we can do here with yellow parents. So if we're assuming that green is dominant, that would tell us that yellow is recessive. And do yellow parents on a Punnett square always have yellow children? If they're recessive, let's test it. A, little a over here. Yep. So a trick is to look for this always. It's usually a recessive trait. And here's another way to reframe this that might help you. Think about hair color in humans. So we could say redheaded people always have redheaded children, but brown-haired people sometimes have brown-haired children, sometimes have redhead children. Have you experienced this in your life? Met any people who have red hair, but their parents might have different color hair? And the question is, which is dominant, red or brown hair? It's the same thing. So think of this as hair color. So redheaded parents should always have redheaded children. And other parents may or may not be carriers for the gene for red hair, and that's why they can pass that along to different generations. Let me show you how that works. Let's say that you have red hair. So AA is your red hair. But your parents have brown hair. In order for you to have red hair while your parents have brown hair, you know that your parents must be heterozygous for this trait. Because their children, AA, there you would be with your red hair with your parents with different colored hair. It also means that some of your siblings will be carriers for this and can pass that little a on to their children, and some of your siblings will not be carriers for this. It also means that one of your grandparents probably had red hair, or at least you had a series of carriers all along. Another highly missed question on the genetics homework was about sex-linked traits, and these are kind of tricky questions. All right, the question says color blindness is a sex-linked recessive trait. Remember that sex-linked traits are on the X chromosome. And of course, genetically, females are XX and males are XY. So this is on the X chromosome. This is the affected chromosome. So there's only one X in a male. So males in general are more likely to have it because they only have to have one copy of the affected gene in order to get the trait. So in general, males are more likely to have sex-linked traits. The X chromosome is way bigger than the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome has very few things on it. The X chromosome has lots of things on it. Okay. What is the possibility of having a colorblind child from a mother who is a carrier and a father who is normal? Normal in our case meaning not colorblind. So since this, we know that colorblindness is a sex-linked recessive trait, let's say it's on the X and we will mark it with a lowercase r for being recessive. And then we'll mark that. And then we'll just do a regular capital X with nothing as not colorblind. I'm just gonna write normal because that's what the question says. All right, normal, not colorblind. So this is dominant and that little r means it's recessive. Okay, for our scenario here, let's solve it. What is the possibility of having a colorblind child from a mother who is a carrier and a father who is normal? So a carrier mother, that will be X, she's got a dominant X, and because she's a carrier, she has one copy of the affected gene. And the father, who is normal, so just X, Y for the father. Let's run this Punnett square. All right. Let's do the mother here. Here's her affected gene. This is fun because these questions can also ask you what percent of the male children will have it versus female children. They're fun ways to ask this question. So pay attention to questions that ask this. See if they're also asking about the gender of the children in addition to the condition of the children, because that can make it kind of fun for asking questions. Here we've got the capital X and here we've got our recessive, and then here, okay. So of course half their children should be males, XY, half should be females. Now look up here, this whole first row, totally unaffected, not colorblind. So right here we have one normal female, one normal male. This is a normal female, but she is a carrier. Because she has this dominant normal trait, we don't see the colorblindness. It is masked. She has the dominant trait. She's not colorblind. This child right here, this boy, is our X with the recessive trait Y. He is going to be colorblind. And the question asks, what's the possibility of having a colorblind child? And some of the questions here, they ask, okay, what about boys and girls? And the correct answer was 50% of the girls will be carriers, which is true. Half of the girls are carriers with this, and 50% of the boys will be colorblind. So that is that. Also, it could ask what percent of their children will be colorblind, and in that case, it would just be 25% of their children will be colorblind. But usually these questions ask you about gender because that's a little more specific of a way to talk about it.